Today I want to share with you how to make skillet biscuit bread. No oven, no yeast, no eggs needed. Hi sweet friends, I'm Mary and welcome to Mary's Nest, where I teach traditional cooking skills for making nutrient-dense foods like bone broth, ferment, sourdough, and more. So if you enjoy learning how to be a modern pioneer in the kitchen, consider subscribing to my channel. And don't forget to click on the little notification bell below. That'll let you know every time I upload a new video. Skillet biscuit bread is a great bread to make when you're in a hurry and have limited ingredients and maybe all you've got to work with is a stovetop. Now the first ingredient that you're going to need is flour. Now this is a very flexible recipe and you can actually make this skillet biscuit bread with any type of flour. To make this very simple, especially for the beginner, I'm going to start with all-purpose flour today. However, in a future video, I'm going to show you how to make this skillet biscuit bread with whole grain flour. Now I have a very detailed video where I go over all the different types of flour that you might bake with and how much liquid you need per cup for each type of flour. So if that's something that you're interested in learning more about, I'll definitely put the link to that video in the description underneath this video. And this type of information comes in handy if you are taking a recipe that calls for all-purpose flour or bread flour, both of which that have had the bran and the germ removed, and you want to transition that recipe into using whole grains, whether they're whole grains from the grocery store that you've bought and that have already been milled into flour for you, or whether you're going to go ahead and mill them on your own grain mill and have freshly milled flour. And all of these, including whether it's modern day wheat or ancient wheats, all of these require different amounts of liquid. So I think you'll find that video extremely helpful. But today for our first skillet biscuit bread, we're going to go with the all-purpose flour and we're going to need 2 cups. Next, you're going to need 1 tablespoon of baking powder, 1 teaspoon of salt, and I've just got a fine ground sea salt here, and you're going to need 1 to 1.5 cups of heavy cream. Depending on where you live, heavy cream may go by different names. It sometimes may be as simple as heavy cream. Other times it may be referred to as heavy whipping cream. And for my sweet friends across the pond, it may be referred to as double cream. And finally, you're going to need some type of fat. This is what we're going to use to cook our skillet biscuit bread in our frying pan or skillet. What I've got here is ghee. And basically what ghee is butter that's been melted down and had the milk solids removed. It has a higher smoke point than butter and is less likely to burn. But if you want to just use butter, you may want to add in a little olive oil. Alternatively, if you've rendered beef suet and you now have tallow, tallow is a wonderful fat to use for this process. And if you'd like to learn how to render suet into tallow, I've got a video where I show you how to do that, and I'll be sure to link to it in the description below. Now we're just going to go in here and just scoop out the flour we need and then just level it off with our knife. Nothing fancy. And then we'll go ahead and put that right into our bowl. Now let me go ahead and get my 2nd cup of flour. Next we're going to go ahead and add our baking powder and our salt. Now, if you use self-rising flour, you can omit the baking powder and the salt. But I know that that's not always easy for everybody to find, so I'm just kind of going old school here, and in essence, we're making our own self-rising flour. So I've got that tablespoon of baking powder in there, and now I'm just going to sprinkle in my teaspoon of salt. Now we just want to whisk this together so that we get that baking powder and salt well distributed with our flour. And I just want to mention, I'm using my magic whisk to do this. You all know how much I love this if you've been with me for a while. But I have to tell you that this used to just cost a few dollars, so I would often say in videos, oh, it's just a few dollars. And somebody recently let me know that if you look at this online, it's like $10 now, or even more. So I think I was talking about it too much, and now the price has gone up. But I will say that this is really a great whisk. Now I'm just going to push this flour aside a bit to make a well in the middle. It makes it easier to mix everything when we pour our liquid in, rather than the liquid just sort of sitting on top of the flour. Now we're going to go ahead and pour our cream into this flour, and we're going to start with just 1 cup. You want a very shaggy dough, so you may need more than 1 cup, but I'll show you exactly what type of texture you're looking for. Now I'm going to share with you a tip of how I like to get this biscuit bread, the skillet biscuit bread, formed before putting it into my skillet. However, if you wanted to go ahead and just throw in your cream, mix it up, and then dump your dough into your skillet, you will want to go ahead and heat this in advance before you pour in your cream. So you'll want to take your fat, you're going to want to put that in your skillet, let the fat melt and get nice and warm. You want this skillet to be heated at about medium, and then you're all set. You can go ahead, once your skillet is heated and your fat is melted, you can go ahead and just pour your dough right in, and then you're going to take your spatula and sort of try to pat it down and even it out. I actually like to do this a little different way, which I'm going to show you today. Well, let's go ahead and start by adding 1 cup of cream into our dough. Now, the thing about this is you don't want to overmix this dough. But we're going to go ahead and just start with 1 cup, because we don't want too much cream. Okay, that looks like about 1 cup, because I've got 1.5 cups in there. And we're going to go ahead and mix this, and hopefully if the consistency looks great, we're all set. If not, we'll go ahead and very gently and gingerly mix in a little extra cream. Now don't worry if you find that you've added a little too much cream and you feel your dough looks very overly shaggy. It can easily be rectified in this method that I show you as to how I like to prepare the dough before putting it into the skillet. But just go ahead and mix in your cream, doing it little by little, so we're not over mixing, we're not getting too aggressive with this dough, but at the same time we're making sure that all of the flour is in fact moistened. Now as I mixed the cream into this dough, I can tell this is very dry. And I'm not surprised, because a lot's going to depend on the conditions in your kitchen as well as your weather outside, which affects the conditions in your kitchen. Now, I live in a very dry climate and we're in the middle of a drought, so it's dry here. And you can test this by knowing that some pieces of your dough you'll be able to squeeze together and it feels like, okay, that seems like it'd be ready basically to shape into a biscuit. On the other hand, you may see some other that looks very dry and crumbly and has not quite got enough liquid absorbed into it. So we're going to go ahead and add additional cream. And I would say if you find that yours is exceptionally dry like mine, you're going to need that full 1/2 cup. If yours has an appearance that looks a little more shaggy than mine, but is just a little bit dry, just start with 1 or 2 tablespoons of cream. Also, when you press your dough to see if it does feel dry and needs additional liquid, you will notice that when you squeeze it, there's no residue on your hand of flour. On the other hand, if you take some of these very dry pieces, you will notice you may be able to try and squeeze them somewhat, but you'll also find you have a lot of residue of flour on your hand as you're trying to squeeze it together. And that's another good indication that you need more liquid. I'm just going to make another well in this mixture. I'm going to go ahead and add my remaining 1/2 cup of cream into my dough, and I'll mix this up and I'll show you exactly the consistency that you want to be looking for. Now this is the perfect consistency that you're looking for. It's a little wet, it's a little shaggy, as they say. It's slightly sticky, but this is going to be the perfect consistency for getting ready to make our skillet biscuit bread. Now, what if you've added too much liquid and you find that it's overly shaggy, maybe very wet? Don't worry, because we're going to flour our board and we're going to shape this into one big biscuit before we go ahead and put this into our frying pan, or our skillet. So when you flour your board, you can also sprinkle additional flour on top as you're shaping it, and that will help absorb any extra liquid that you may have added that was too much liquid. Now I'm going to go ahead and put my burner up to medium heat. I'm going to go ahead and put my fat in here into my skillet and let that melt and let this skillet get nice and warm. You do want to get everything melted, but not necessarily sizzling as if it were on, high heat. And I'm going to have to watch this a little carefully, because if you've been with me a while, you know I've shared that I find this countertop burner very handy. However, it also runs hot, which is great to have when I'm canning, water bath canning. But for cooking, I got to really keep an eye on it. But let's go ahead and let that just melt up, and we'll form our biscuit. Now I just want to mention, I'm using a 10-inch cast iron skillet. This is a very old skillet and it's very well seasoned, which has created a nice non-stick coating. But as you see, I'm still putting plenty of fat in here, because we really want to guarantee that our skillet biscuit bread browns up nicely and also doesn't stick. You can use other types of skillets or frying pans if you don't have a well-seasoned cast iron skillet. You can use a true nonstick skillet that has sort of the healthy nonstick coating, or you could try using one of the ceramic skillets that are very popular today. But whatever you use, even if it says nonstick, be sure to go ahead and put your 2 tablespoons of fat. It's going to help with the browning, and it's going to guarantee that nothing sticks, because sometimes even when things say nonstick, things can stick. Now my dough is really looking very good, so I'm not going to over flour. I'm just going to put a little bit of flour on my board, and then I'm going to pull this out, and we're going to shape this basically gently, somewhat gingerly, because we always don't want to overmix or overhandle any type of biscuit dough. But what we're going to do is we're going to shape this into basically a biscuit that's going to fit into my 10-inch skillet. So I'm just going to make it a little smaller than the skillet. Now, that said, if you were doing the original method that I mentioned to you earlier in this video, you would have just plopped this down into your hot skillet, and you would have tried to use your spatula to flatten it out somewhat. I always find that a little, tedious. I don't know exactly what I would describe it as, but I think this method just works better. So you just want to pat this down and just make sure it's not sticking underneath. And you just want to get it to about, if you're using a 10-inch skillet, which I recommend, and you're using this particular amount of flour with cream, you're going to want your dough to be about a ½ an inch in height. And so don't worry too much about the diameter. Just focus more on the height. And it's not an exact science. You can just get it as round as you think looks good. Alrighty, well, my ghee is all melted, and as I shared with you, this runs hot, so I've actually lowered the heat down from the medium setting. And we will get ready in a minute when I feel that the temperature is just dropped slightly. Now, this spatula works fantastic for this job. Just be careful of when you are putting this into the hot fat that you're not, that you do it very gently so that you don't burn yourself, so that you don't get any of that hot fat splashing up at you. Now, as my skillet biscuit bread cooks in the skillet, I do like to cover it to help get a good rise and to help it cook through. Now, that said, I do like one that does allow for a little bit of venting so that we're not getting a lot of condensation on our lid, which then just drips down onto the skillet biscuit bread and has the potential to make it a little soggy. So if you have a lid but it doesn't have these little vents, you can always just tilt it a little bit just to let out some of the steam. Alrighty, well, let's go ahead and put this into our skillet. And as I said, just be a little careful when you do this. Oh, listen to that sizzle. Now I'm going to go ahead and put this lid on. Now, how long is this going to take? Again, there are some variables in this too, just like there were some variables with how much cream we were going to need. You want to keep an eye on this because you don't want the underside to burn. So I recommend, and again, you know your stovetop, you know your skillets. I've actually got this on a relatively low temperature right now because, as I mentioned, this does run hot. So I'm going to check this in about 15 minutes. And I suggest that you do the same, especially if you're making this for the first time. Now, I checked this after 15 minutes, but it still was feeling a little loose, so I let it go for another 5 minutes. I did take a peek underneath, and it was becoming golden. It looked lovely. It wasn't burning, so we were in good shape. Now, at this point, you have a couple of options. If it's just easier for you to not worry about flipping this over, and getting it back into the pan. We'll talk about flipping it out of the pan in a minute. But if it's just easier for you to just cook it like this and not have to worry about trying to flip it in the pan, you can go ahead and just put your lid back on. Again, keeping an eye on this, let it cook maybe another 5 minutes or so, and then just come back and check and make sure that your dough is cooked on top. And it'll definitely have the appearance. It'll no longer be shiny or sticky or anything like that, and it'll just look like a cooked biscuit, but one that is just natural in color as opposed to having a little bit of golden color to the top and a little bit of crispness. Now, what you can do if you decide to take this route is once it is cooked, you turn off your heat, and if you're using a cast iron skillet like mine, never forget to have some type of guard that slides on or a pot holder, to protect your hand from the heat. And then you can go ahead and just slide it onto you can put it right onto a plate. You don't have to worry about a cooling rack because biscuits are often best served when they are warm. And then you can put another plate on top and just flip it over so that the golden, crispier top is what's showing when you go to serve it and then slice it. However, if you do want to go ahead and flip this over, I completely understand if it makes you a little nervous. It always makes me a little nervous whether it's going to stay together or not. But if you have one of these wider spatulas, this is, I think, a pancake spatula. This works very well. And you can even use 2 spatulas or one of these and a wooden spoon, whatever you have to help guide it. But I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to just guide this underneath. And then I'm going to do this very gently, just kind of moving it around. And you'll find that if you've used a pan that does have a nice nonstick coating, like my skillet here, my cast iron skillet, or some other type of nonstick skillet, and you put the correct amount of fat in, you should be in good shape. And nothing should be easy to release. If you want, at this point, before you flip it, you can go ahead and coat this with a little melted ghee or whatever other fat you're using. However, I often find because we've made this with cream, there's a lot of fat in this dough, and so this will brown nicely as well. Alrighty, well, I've got this on my spatula, and wish me luck. Boom! Ah! Well, there were a few casualties on the side, but I wanted to do this for you in real time to show you that this can happen. So if you feel more comfortable to just slide it off, by all means do. But I often do that, but I did want to show you how it can be a little challenging to flip it and to get it without a little bit of it breaking off. It's just such a tender, large biscuit. I think it's going to be delicious. So let me just let that finish cooking. About 5 more minutes on that side, and then we'll slice it up and see how it came. Well, I just peeked, and the underside looks beautifully golden now too. So we're in good shape, and if you have any doubts at all, you can always stick a toothpick in the middle, and if it comes out clean, meaning it has no, the crumbs on it are dry, there's no wetness to it, then you know your skillet biscuit bread is done. Now, this is a very rustic bread, often served in a very rustic way, that you don't even need to worry about slicing it per se. You could if you wanted to slice it into triangles, but often people will just break off pieces, and as much or as little as they want, probably as much. And once you get it onto your plate, out of your frying pan, out of your skillet, if you decide that you want to show one side or the other, you can just use another plate like this and then flip it, and then you'll be able to show the other side. But I think this looks great. There are those few casualties in the skillet, but that's going to make for a nice cook's treat. Now, how to serve this? You can just eat this bread as is, but since it does have a biscuit texture, and we'll break into it in a second, you can put some butter on it, you can drizzle it with some honey, you can drizzle it with a mixture of honey and butter. Something that's very popular to do with skillet biscuit bread is to mix a little butter and a little molasses and make a tasty yet very nutritious spread for it. So with clean hands, you can just go right in and just start breaking this apart. Well, I broke off some of the pieces, and I'll bring you in closer so that you can see the beautiful interior texture of how this skillet biscuit bread came. I think you're going to be very happy with it. And I also flipped it over so that you could see the underside and how this too became nice and golden as well. The top part, or the original side, is a little crisper because it went into that hot fat, but you'll see, I'll come close. This is crisp as well. So it's going to be very tasty. I'm confident of that. And I absolutely love the interior texture. Well, let's give this a taste. We'll take this piece here and we'll see how it came. It's nice. Oh, it's really nice and light and fluffy. That is so tasty. I love biscuits made with cream, and this skillet biscuit bread made with cream, I have to admit, may even be better. Now, if you'd like more recipes on how to make very easy breads, including a sandwich bread that I share with you that already has well over 1 million views. It's that easy to make, and you'll never have to buy sandwich bread again. Be sure to click on this video over here where I have a full playlist including that video for sandwich bread and lots more. And I'll see you over there in my Texas Hill Country kitchen. Love and God bless.